Christine Brown, City Clerk. Please state for the record if you are present after I call your name. Mayor Morwaki.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Hytopoulos.
Present.
Councilmember Matthews.
Present.
Councilmember Fenton Johnson.
Present.
Councilmember Nelson.
Present.
Councilmember Lant. Present. Councilmember Schneider.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve tonight's City Council study session as presented.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Any conflicts of interest to declare? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to regular business. And the first item up is receive presentation of Washington Department of Commerce Housing Accountability Act.
Thank you, Council. Ellen Schroer, Acting City Manager. City staff has been working with the Department of Commerce on a review that they are performing under the Housing Accountability Act. We are one of 8 jurisdictions statewide that they are working with. As this process proceeds, staff will be working with the Commerce Department and will be providing updates on the finished work product on our city website. There is currently a press release or a press notice, news notice that shows kind of what is happening, under what authority, and what the tentative timeline will be. We'll hear more today about the steps that are coming up and the timing. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Planning and Community Development Director, Patty Charnas, and then staff from Department of Commerce. Thank you.
Good evening, City Council. Patty Charnas, Planning and Community Development. It's a pleasure to be here. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Laura Hodgson of the Department of Commerce. She's our Housing Accountability Program Manager. And I don't know if the housing manager, Ann Fritzl, is also with us, but I'll let Laura do that introduction, and Laura will give us an overview and take your questions afterwards. Without any further ado, Laura.
Hello, can you hear me tonight?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, great. Yes, I don't know if Ann will be able to join us. Ann Fritzl is the Housing Section Manager in the Department of Commerce, but she is had a prior engagement prior to being asked to attend tonight. But I have coordinated with her, and we are excited to share this information with you tonight. So good evening. My name is Laura Hodgson, Housing Planning and Data Manager and the Growth Management Services Unit at the Department of Commerce. In my role, I help communities plan for their future housing needs through their comprehensive plans and development regulations. I'm assuming that most, if not all of you, are already very familiar with the Growth Management Act and working through the periodic update. The periodic update includes an update of your comprehensive plan and development regulations that, when updated, is considered valid upon adoption. In 2025, the legislature adopted a new provision in the Growth Management Act called the Housing Accountability Act. It provides new authority for Commerce to review and make decisions on local government compliance with the housing-related portions of the GMA. The Housing Accountability Act, or HAA, as we like to call it for short, because it can get to be a bit of a mouthful, is codified in RCW 3678-835 and provides for Commerce review of housing elements and housing-related development regulations. The statute outlines 2 processes, voluntary and selected review. The voluntary process allows for local governments to seek Commerce review and approval of their housing elements and housing-related regulations and receive Commerce appeals protection in the event of an appeal to the Growth Management Act. And then there's the selected review process, which I'm here to talk to you more about tonight. The selected review process provides that Commerce may select up to 10 cities or counties a year for review of their housing elements and associated development regulations. The legislature provided 3 criteria that must be used to identify jurisdictions for selected review, as listed here on the screen. After a public process to determine the details of these criteria and feedback from stakeholders, Commerce determined that criteria B and C, which include data points related to the progress jurisdictions are making with seeing housing development in their jurisdiction and how that relates to their future housing needs as adopted by countywide planning policies and the allocations that are each divided up to each jurisdiction, was determined that those were not appropriate to be used as a selection criteria at this time because jurisdictions' comprehensive plans and development regulations have just taken effect and they haven't had a chance to see the housing production as a result of those. Therefore, this year, Commerce just used criteria A, which is jurisdictions who have not planned for and accommodated their portion of the countywide housing need. This year, Commerce selected from jurisdictions whose periodic update was due December 31st, 2024. From these jurisdictions, Commerce selected a mix of jurisdictions that are a combination of jurisdictions that have not adopted their comprehensive plan and those that have adopted a comprehensive plan, but that had multiple inconsistencies with the housing element requirements. And you can see the list here on the screen. The legislature has directed Commerce to review local government planning documents for consistency with the list of requirements in RCW 3670A 835-7. These include the ones here listed on this slide and on the next slide, and I'm going to walk through them in a little bit of detail just so that you know what we are reviewing for. One, we're reviewing for the housing planning goal, which has changed from encourage affordable housing to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all incomes. So it puts more focus on the work that local governments are doing to allow housing in their communities. The housing element requirements is also what we'll be reviewing for. This is changed to include new provisions to plan for housing needs of all incomes, which you received in coordination with Kitsap County, identify and remove barriers to affordable housing, also known as adequate provisions, analyze if policies and regulations have led to racially disparate impacts in housing and update policies to address these impacts, analyze areas at risk of displacement and update policies to address displacement risk. And in addition to these requirements, Commerce will check for consistency with the growth management Washington Administrative Code rules. That's the third orange bullet here on the screen, SEPA regulation requirements, and consistency with the city's comprehensive plan. The law also lists a limited number of development regulations that Commerce must review for consistency with state requirements. These include implementing development regulation changes to ensure sufficient land capacity for housing needs identified in the comprehensive plan, development regulations for emergency shelter, transitional housing, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing, which we call STEP, and co-living density bonuses for affordable housing on property owned by religious organizations, and selective parking requirements. As you can see, Bainbridge Island is not required to implement the state requirements for middle housing and ADUs, which it is not beholden to. Commerce has checklists for these requirements to guide jurisdictions in completing these updates, as shown in blue on this slide and on the previous slide. The process for the Housing Accountability Act selected review process is outlined in statute with some specific timeframes. During this process, Commerce will work with staff to provide technical assistance and ensure procedural steps are followed. The first step in this process is outlined in the legislature by the legislature is for HAA selected review jurisdictions to submit their 2024 comprehensive plans and housing-related development regulations to Commerce and complete the associated checklists by the end of February 2026. For those jurisdictions who have not yet adopted comprehensive plans, we expect to see any existing drafts that you have as the furthest draft along that you have so that we can provide feedback. And this allows us to do the next step, as written again in the statute, is for Commerce to provide written comments on the drafts or the material that was submitted to Commerce, identifying where a jurisdiction's plans and regulations may not align with state statute. Once we've provided that written letter, the cities will have 120 days to adopt or make amendments to its comprehensive plan and development regulations to address the comments and align with the Growth Management Act requirements. After the city has updated its plans and regulations, Commerce will re-review and issue a written decision on the final adopted material in November. In between April and November, Commerce is available to answer questions and provide information to staff, and Commerce can provide presentations to Council about the state requirements. The HAA also provides for builder and developer feedback in the HAA process. We expect the optimal time for this to occur during the city's normal public review feedback process during the draft and final adoption stages. Commerce under the HAA does have the option to consult with housing developers or builders themselves, but does not see utilizing that opportunity at this time based on the scope of the review requirements that the legislature has directed to Commerce. If a jurisdiction is found to be in noncompliance after that They've submitted amendments to their comprehensive plan housing element and development regulations. There are a few consequences. Jurisdictions may not deny affordable or moderate income housing development. They may not approve affordable or moderate income housing projects with conditions that have a substantial adverse impact on the project. And they may not be eligible for certain state grants and loans, including those listed on the screen. And these are outlined in WAC 365, 196, 585. There are some situations where the by right affordable housing provision, which is what we are referring to the provision on the previous slide where jurisdictions who are found out of compliance may not deny affordable housing projects. We call that the by right affordable housing provision. There are some situations where this may not apply to a jurisdiction who is found to be inconsistent. These include when a state or federal law requires denial or approval of a project by the local government, if a development is outside of an urban growth area, in a critical area or critical area buffer where development is not permitted, or in a shoreline master program area where residential uses are not allowed, or if the development is located in an area where residential or mixed-use development is not permitted. Therefore, the HAA by right affordable housing provision would apply in Bainbridge Island in areas where there are urban services where the city is planning for future growth. Should the jurisdiction be found to be non-compliant after it has a chance to amend any identified gaps in their plan or development regulations. Again, this by right affordable housing provision would then require the city to allow affordable housing development. This affordable housing development must either be affordable or moderate income development as listed on the slide here, where either 20% of the units are at 60% AMI rental or 80% ownership, 50% of the units are at workforce housing, which is below 80% AMI rental or 100% AMI ownership, or all of the units are moderate income housing below 120% of AMI. The development would have to ensure affordability for a minimum of 25 years with an affordability covenant on the property, and the county or city must periodically audit the affordability. And we have a new program that helps counties and cities audit affordability should that be a need in the community. With that, we have some additional information on our updating GMA Housing Elements webpage. If you scroll down to the Housing Accountability Act, you'll find the information that we have available there. Additional information is also available in our CW 3678-835. And of course, we are happy to answer any questions either now or in the future. And if for some reason we can't answer them now, we will collect our answers as soon as possible and get back to you at the earliest time we can. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you so much, Council. Not sure it was all of a sudden. Who's first? Councilmember Franto Johnson.
Okay. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
I've met you before, but, oh, sorry. I wanted to ask you about this review. So if I'm understanding it right, what you're offering us is technical assistance to get our comprehensive plan, the affordable housing element, completed. Is that correct? When you talked about the STEP supportive housing, is that a requirement for the county, or would that be also one of our requirements to
It is
provide?
also a requirement of the cities. Cities are required to allow emergency shelters and emergency housing in certain zones and permanent supportive housing and transitional housing in certain zones. That was a part of what was called House Bill 1220 in 2021. And all cities, even if they're not fully planning under the GMA, are required to implement those changes.
Okay. And the technical support that you're going to provide to us consists of these checklists that you'll.
Yes, checklists and also answering questions of staff. We are happy to provide examples of what other jurisdictions have done that aligns with the statute, walking through our guidance, answering questions, or even whatever else is needed that would help staff with their work.
And then one final question. When we provide this information and you review it, is it possible that some of these recommendations that you will give us will be based on code changes for areas that may not have the right codes, I guess, to build affordable housing?
So we will comment on broad changes for the comprehensive plan housing element to align. We won't provide specific requirements for example, certain zoning changes that may need to be made. We will just recommend and point out if there's an inconsistency and what are maybe the options before you. That would help to make it more consistent, your plan more consistent. We don't want to dictate how you plan for your community, but we do want to help you, point you in the right direction. For the development regulations, they will probably be a little bit more specific because development recommendations implement the comprehensive plan. So they tend to be more specific. In that case, we will identify if changes are needed and point you to some good examples of how to of codes that align or are model ordinances in the case we have them, and we have those for a number of different of the requirements that that Bainbridge Island needs to align with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes. Be able to put that up. Okay, first I just wanted to say thank you for being here, Laura. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we really want to get in compliance with the law, and I think that we really appreciate Commerce coming in and helping us with this. And so I actually just have some very specific questions because what we've definitely been struggling with as a community and I think as a council is obviously HB 1220, planning for and accommodating housing affordable to all economic segments and making adequate provision for all economic segments. And so I'm going to kind of go through a few questions, just help us to figure out potential options, if that's helpful. Okay. So just first kind of level setting, we can't just do market rate upzoning, right? We can't just say this density corresponds with this level of affordability and say this is dense enough to qualify for, below 80% AMI and sort of be done with that, right?
That is what we originally recommended. The framework for planning for affordable housing has slightly changed with a recent Growth Management Hearings Board case. The Growth Management Hearings Board is the court system that provides checks and balances under the Growth Management Act and helps to make sure that jurisdictions and commerce are interpreting the statute correctly. And what surmised out of that hearings board case was that jurisdictions need to identify the role that subsidies and incentives play in affordable housing. And specifically, that case found that jurisdictions need to identify subsidies or provisions for or incentives for all of their housing needs. Now, there is an active appeal on that case. So we are pending and watching that case. But in the meantime, we have updated our guidance to align with what we feel would be the main takeaways to every jurisdiction, not just specifically Mercer Island, because the case findings were specifically for Mercer Island. And what we are recommending is that jurisdictions still identify the types of housing that would be affordable to households, even if subsidies were available, and that can count as their capacity. And then under the adequate provisions piece is that jurisdictions need to identify what is the funding gap and what can they do to help close that funding gap and create incentives to help bridge that gap towards so that those affordable units, which won't typically be provided by the market, would be achieved. Our updated guidance does not require that jurisdictions find sufficient capacity or incentives and funding for every single affordable housing unit, understanding that there is a large portion of funding that comes from multiple different sources. This is our guidance as it stands right now. Again, we're watching that case and the appeals case, but we recognize that there is a role for local governments to play in this, and that they're also limited in their constraints too. They don't have the very deep pockets that we all wish we had to fund affordable housing. So the guidance was developed with a balance in mind.
No, that's really helpful, and I think the language they used was affordable in fact, right? Is what they said instead of okay. And actually, so you went to the incentives or subsidies, and that's exactly where I was going to go with it, the 80% AMI and below. And so starting with incentives, I put up on the screen, this is what page, I think it's page, is it 35?
Maybe 38 or yeah, somewhere in
I think
that
it's
range.
35 of book 2, the updated version. And it discusses inclusionary zoning and sort of how it counts towards your allocation under 1220, right? And I think I had a couple questions about this. So first, I want to touch on voluntary inclusionary zoning, because currently our planning commission has recommended voluntary inclusionary zoning. And I just want to get this right as far as how to do the math, as far as how many units count. So the policy that the planning commission has put forward is this idea that if 25% or more units are affordable, sort of 80% AMI and below, there will be bonus density and bonus height, right? We don't yet know the participation rate, but I'm to understand staff is working on that. But so if I get the math right, what counts is, say we create capacity for 2,000 units and we have this policy in place. You'd take 25% of that would be 500 units, and then take 5% of that. Is that right? Do you do the number of units sort of times the percentage that are required to be affordable, then times the participation rate?
I believe so. I have to reread this paragraph again. It's been a few years since so yes, it is accounting for 25% of the units, and then a small percentage of them given the participation rate. And the reason for that is if a jurisdiction opts for a voluntary inclusionary zoning program or has a voluntary inclusionary zoning program on the books, there is not a lot of developers who choose to avail themselves of the density bonuses or affordable housing provisions that the voluntary inclusionary zoning program allows. So only a very small portion are likely to use that provision, as is evidenced by the voluntary inclusionary zoning programs throughout the Puget Sound region.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. I just to kind of, I think, put perspective on it, if we're supposed to do 1,139 units that are 80% AMI and below, and you start with that, and then you have to do 4 times as many of that to get the units, because we're only doing 25% that's affordable. And then if, say, our participation rate's only 5%, you then have to multiply that by 20. You actually would have to do 91,120 units to actually meet our allocation. And if you kind of multiply that by, say 2.4 people per unit, it's about 218,000 more people. And so I'm just trying to put that in perspective, that might not be a viable path forward.
And Councilmember, I think these are very helpful questions. I also want to be careful that we balance everyone's opportunity to ask questions as well, and maybe kind of move around, maybe could come back one more time. Also, just want to be careful that we aren't spending too much time drilling down too much into all the specifics, but I mean,
yeah, I'd say
they're helpful.
A few more questions. Thank you. I think the other one I touched on is mandatory inclusionary zoning. I notice here that if you do 10% is mandatory inclusionary zoning, that just counts, right? Is it the same if you, for instance, did a 50% inclusionary zoning policy? If 50% of new units had to be affordable, would that count? at 50%?
That's a very good question. I don't think any jurisdiction has considered that. And I think in that case, because it is something that would end up precluding development, anything over what the market would reasonably bear would need to be considered differently than as outlined here, because it would disincentivize any development and you would not get any development as opposed to getting 50% of what you do get or allowed to get.
Okay, okay. And then I think my question on subsidies is the other one, which is, could we, for instance, upzone for projects that are 100% affordable and then cost out what it would cost to subsidize those and then figure out where we can get funding and list the rest in gaps in local funding? Would that be an appropriate way to comply?
It's hard to say based on that specific circumstance. I think that it needs to be a combination of overall capacity increase and affordable housing density provision, because the affordable housing density provision is not likely to be used very widely. Therefore, you would not get enough development to cover your jurisdiction's housing needs with just that. Therefore, it
You'd
needs to
still
be a
multiply it
combination.
by the participation rate is what I'm getting.
Yes.
Right. Okay, okay. Well, I'll let it go around, Deputy Mayor, and maybe come back to me for more. Thank you.
Councilmember Land?
Thank you. Hi, Laura. Thank you very much for being here and providing some clarity. I understand this is Commerce's first year doing this as well, so I'm guessing this is an exciting time for everybody.
Yeah.
I had some questions. So we have already, on the advice of our consultant, Joe Tovar, we have already set a timeline for completion of our comp plan set by resolution. Is there any way we can stick with that timeline, and because it will either meet or beat what is presented today as far as a timeline goes? Is that something that Commerce would consider?
Yes, meeting or beating is fine with the timeline.
Okay, with and without recommendations from Commerce, if we merely chugged along on our own?
We still have to work towards providing that feedback, and that is something that we would do anyways, even if without the Housing Accountability Act, because we would still all comprehensive plan amendments need to be submitted to Commerce for 60-day review, in which case we would provide the same review. So, and it helps to, I think, in your process to align the plan with the goals and the local needs and the state requirements. So unfortunately, we can't skip that process, and it would probably already happen anyways.
All right, very good. Thank you. Out of curiosity, so our city doesn't contain all the different agencies that other municipalities do. We have a separate park district, we have a separate fire department. Are those agencies affected by our being selected for this process? Will grants and loans be withheld from them as well as us?
Just the ones that were listed on the slide.
So there were some recreation pointed things. So right now, like the park district may or may not be able to receive.
If they were receiving funds from the state recreation office or the agency that funds those, then they could potentially be at risk of not receiving future grants.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That was not made clear to me earlier, and that's a big deal for a lot of folks. And thank you. I think you kind of answered this already, but one of my questions was, will you offer us some suggestions that have been adopted in the comp plans of other cities that are comparable to ours that you think are potentially successful, and we could cut and paste,
Yes, we have some examples online, and we will pull some other examples that might be more comparable to the size or character of Bainbridge Island or similar economic markets, so that you have something, other examples to work from besides what we already have provided.
Perfect. And when our residents or our community has questions or comments, are they directing them to Commerce or to our own city staff?
To your city staff.
Okay.
Our main role is to interact with your city staff and to support them in providing the background framework of the Growth Management Act and the requirements and recommendations from us to align to city council. But other than that, our role is to allow the stakeholders and the public to engage with the city through their process.
Okay, so going forward, it would be unusual to talk with council maybe more than one more time after this. You're working with
We
staff.
primarily with staff.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Thanks so much.
Councilmember Matthews?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Hi, Laura. Thanks so much for being here. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I just had a couple questions. So I know this is the first year of the program. Do you see it evolving in any way?
Yes, we see it evolving in that initially these first few years, we envision it as a program to help jurisdictions align with adopting plans and regulations in the first place if they are having trouble adopting. Some jurisdictions take multiple years to adopt. I mean, there are some jurisdictions who don't have any staff and they only have a clerk who's overseeing their comprehensive plan and development regulations. So they have no staff, negative staff to do this work. So that and helping jurisdictions align with the base requirements. Come 5 years from now, we'll start implementing criteria B and C of the selection criteria, which is when jurisdictions aren't seeing some of the housing production that they need to accommodate their housing needs. And that's not the full level of housing production, but that's 50% of their housing production. So if they're not seeing 50% or they're seeing not a wide variety of housing types, those will be places where the HAA process will probably shift to provide different levels of technical assistance and support to jurisdictions to help them identify what are those barriers that are within the control of the local government to amend, if there are any, and working with them to amend those. And if there aren't, then we will evaluate that at that time. But it'll hopefully, again, be working with jurisdictions to see their housing built in their communities based on their needs.
Thank you. Councilmember Lance sort of touched on this and you answered it in a way, but what if I don't think we even have a draft to show. I could be wrong. But if we do not have a draft to show within that timeline, are there any consequences for that?
We are looking for the most complete version of what you have available.
Okay.
And then we want to provide written feedback on that so that you have a goal of understanding what you need to work towards. And we're happy to continue to work with staff as you get a more final version. But we do want to provide written comments as early as possible so that you know what to work towards. So your latest version or your most complete version or your most complete assemblage of pieces, that is what we can work with and provide feedback on so that you have guidance to move forward with.
Okay. When would cities be notified if they were going to be having to, I think it was the buy right or the
By right affordable housing provision. So that would come in the fall after they have adopted any changes to their comprehensive plan and development regulations. After they submit those, Commerce will re-review the materials. We expect that to take at least approximately 60 days, maybe a
Okay.
little bit less, maybe a little bit more. There's no specific timeline, but we want to make sure we're doing a careful review and not missing anything because we don't want to label a jurisdiction out of compliance for something that is actually there. So that timeline would put it somewhere in October or November.
Okay. And then, sorry, only two more.
That's great.
Were there more than 8 cities who would have qualified for this?
Yes, there were more than 8 cities that would have qualified.
Okay. So that's one. And then last question is, what are some of the conditions that would have an adverse effect on a project?
So the example I like to give is height limits. So for example, if your community has a 30-foot height limit and a developer really wants to come in and build a 3-story walk-up apartment building, or even a row of townhouses that is 3 stories because they have parking on the ground floor and 2 levels above and a pitched roof, they would not be able to come in and build that if you had a 30-foot height limit. So a 30-foot height limit in that case would be a barrier. And we would recommend you evaluating, could you raise that to 35 or 40 feet to allow that type of very affordable or more affordable product to be built in your community that is in many cases desirable for people, especially, townhouses and apartments to be built in your community. So that's one example. Lot coverage, setbacks, higher parking requirements, in some cases, extended review processes, so conditional use processes for certain types of development could be a big barrier because that adds 2 to 6 months to a year to a project, which means that the developers has a lot of carrying costs and they're just not going to look at that type of project in your community. So those are a few examples. We have a checklist that walks through a variety of different barriers so that jurisdictions can do a comprehensive review of what those might be. And they are all different depending on your jurisdiction.
Thank you so much.
I believe it was next, Mayor Morwaki.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you, Laura. You've got a lot of work ahead of you. I realize that. I'm looking at your slide number 8, and this is just the guidelines of what we must do or cannot do, avoid. And it says we may not deny affordable or moderate income housing development. We may not approve affordable or moderate income projects with conditions that may have a substantial adverse impact on the project. And then, of course, if we fail to meet these deadlines, we lose a lot of opportunities for grants and such. So you kind of segued on your last answer to Councilmember Matthews. So you just gave an example on the height that you see this area that would need to have this kind of height for more affordable housing opportunities. And so you make that recommendation. And so what happens if we don't follow your recommendation and say, well, we still think this can work out?
So when we provide feedback on the comprehensive plan, typically we'll be providing feedback that what was submitted didn't align because it did not show enough information, or it did not show a quantitative analysis of the work, or it did not actually do the specific steps that the legislature has required. In this case, for the item that you seem to be referring to, and I'm happy to speak on any of the specific items, was adequate provisions. What we're looking for is jurisdictions to have done a review of what the barriers are and make a concerted effort and not just say, we're going to allow ADUs and that's it. And do a analysis and review and then identify what barriers are up to them within their community. We won't be recommending specific changes within the jurisdiction. We'll leave that up to the jurisdiction staff and elected officials to make those decisions on what are the local barriers and what needs to be removed to encourage affordable housing, so long as they've made an effort to do the work.
Follow up, please. So if I'm understanding you, these are just recommendations. So again, if we had that opportunity, then you pick the height, but it doesn't matter what we're, just any observation of something that we're falling short on and making the appropriate means to have affordable housing and not meet the goals of 1220, et cetera. And it's in your professional opinion that this is how you would have to zone this area to make that possible. And we take that information and we say, well, we really don't follow. And then let's say the comp plan is not accepted. Is there a penalty that you gave us your best advice and we ignored it or chose to go a different route that didn't meet the same objective?
Sorry, can you restate the question? Sorry, I was a little confused where it ended up. I thought it was going somewhere else. Apologies. Would you mind restating it?
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Sorry,
Okay.
it was a long question.
Yeah, if I can remember. So you said it's going to be just recommendations. They're not going to have any kind of penalties or any kind of things that can really force us to take your recommendations to heart and assume them. So what I just heard you say was that you're going to make a recommendation that says, whatever the issue is, this is how we believe is the best way to meet the goals of the Growth Management Act that you're supposed to apply for density and affordable housing, et cetera. And so you gave us that recommendation and then we don't follow it or come up with a different path. And then it's discovered that that was the right option, that your advice was the appropriate choice. how do we defend ourselves in a comp plan in a situation like that?
Oh, it's okay. The question is, how do you defend yourself if you didn't follow a recommendation that we gave, and your plan no longer aligned? And,
Right,
and you are found non-consistent?
exactly, yeah.
Well, in the case that you, if your plan is found non-consistent in the end, then there will most likely be a decision of non-compliance. Regardless of, I think, what leads up to it. At the end, we're reviewing for consistency with the requirements as have been outlined by the statute, as codified in, or written in the Washington Administrative Code, which implements, which provides guidance to the statute and the recent growth management hearings board cases. So we have a lot of fairly clear parameters to work off of to make those decisions.
So you as Commerce would make that decision, as you just said, you'd be just deciding on how we were in compliance or not?
Yes, we make that final decision.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Schneider?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Laura. I really appreciate you being here. This can't be an easy position to be in at the moment, but we really appreciate it. Just to go back to what Mayor Moriwaki was just talking about, if I'm just going to say what I think we're getting at is that, you know, your recommendations are just recommendations, but in the end, we can go a different direction, but we have to support that with data and math. So we don't have to follow anything specifically requested of us or suggested to us, but in the end, you know, hopefully those are helpful in us getting to a good result. Is that another way of putting it?
That's fair. Yes.
Okay,
And showing your work and doing the
math.
well, it's not only the math, some of the requirements are showing your work that you've done an analysis and you've made a consideration about changing your policies and you've evaluated those barriers. But yes, a big portion of this work is the math.
Got it. Okay, so my question, what I separately wanted to ask is in the, I'm not sure, I think it's slide number 5, and I'm not sure what deck it's in, but where it says for HAA approval, local government planning documents must be consistent with. And then the second bullet is emergency shelter, transitional housing, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing, the STEP requirements. So I think I heard you say that what that means is we have to designate where those, where the opportunities are for those, but how far do we need to go? Because obviously those are pretty tough in terms of requiring deep, deep subsidies. So what does a successful comp plan look like with regards to STEP requirements?
So with regard to that, what we're looking for, and what the legislature outlines in those two pieces of requirements, and one is for code cities and one is for regular cities, is that emergency shelter and emergency housing are allowed in all zones that allow hotels, and that transitional housing and permanent supportive housing are allowed in all zones that allow residential uses and hotels. Jurisdictions do have the ability or authority to add restrictions on those uses within those zones, so long as there can still have sufficient land capacity to build and accommodate their housing needs. So, for example, if a city were to allow emergency shelter and emergency housing in the zones that they allow hotels, and they had a 1-mile buffer between facilities, but they only allowed it in a 3-block area and they couldn't accommodate all of their needs in one building, their spacing requirements would prohibit them from accommodating their housing needs. So The goal is to allow them in those zones that I just mentioned with reduced requirements that align as closely to other types of development that have similar types of scenarios. So permitting emergency shelter and transitional housing, or sorry, emergency housing and emergency shelter, if possible, similar to hotels because it's short-term stays. For permanent supportive housing and transitional housing, permitting them in no way different than housing development generally. And there's a specific citation for that. So that is the goal with that. And we actually have specific detailed guidance for this called STEP guidance on our updating GMA housing element webpage, because when this law was passed, there was not any information about, first of all, what is emergency housing? Why is it different than emergency shelter? Why do we need to allow it in our communities? What does this mean? What parameters can we provide on it? So we have additional guidance on our webpage on that, and happy to speak more about that if you have any additional questions.
Okay, but just to follow up quickly, then we don't necessarily, we have to allow for it in the numbers required, but we don't have to incentivize.
No,
for
you
it?
don't.
Okay. All right, that's super clear. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if council's okay, I have a couple questions. And thank you. I just want to reiterate the thanks because we've kind of put you on a hot seat here and hope we're being fair, and thank you for your patience.
Definitely.
We're highly curious about all this and have been doing a lot of thinking about it for a long time. So I would try to limit myself to two questions here. One question is, I guess I'll preface it with saying I was so relieved to hear you say, which I guess I understand from the Mercer Island situation, that it's no longer acceptable to just upzone alone, that alone isn't assumed, that because we've created a bunch of multifamily, we're going to have affordable. And that's how I've always felt. So I was glad to hear that. And we have to have some sort of a plan, et cetera. But then what it sounds like that I was hearing as well was that, which is that now goes back to my concern, is that we can't choose to, the reason we can't choose to hinge our up zones on affordability is that you expressed concern we wouldn't reach our overall housing target. And I'm trying to reconcile that with what our numbers are for, the higher AMIs, because obviously we're a community that's already extremely imbalanced in favor of the 120 and above. And so I'm hoping you can help me understand what that means. If we're able to demonstrate capacity for, 100 up, let's say, and we're hinging, let's say 80 and up, and then we're hinging our up zones on affordability of the project, what housing target are we worried we won't meet if there isn't enough uptake on the affordable? And I'm assuming, of course, we've got a fleshed out plan, lots of capacity planned for that, but dependent on the affordability. So can you help me understand why we'd be concerned about not getting more, say, market rate housing in that situation?
Yeah, so let me clarify what I was trying to convey, and I apologize if I didn't convey it clearly, is, and this is my maybe misunderstanding of the question, but we at Commerce, we would not recommend that jurisdictions rely solely on an affordable housing bonus for or a density bonus for affordable housing as their sole means of accommodating their housing, because it is unlikely that they will see enough development to actually accommodate their housing. So a combination, we certainly encourage and applaud affordable housing incentives, and we think that it's important that all communities do that. However, there is a role also to provide a base level of density or capacity, however you choose to do that within your jurisdiction, to partner with the affordable housing density bonus, recognizing that affordable housing density bonus will not be enough in itself. So you need a combination of capacity that is allowed in a way by right that will happen without an extra incentive, and encouraging affordable housing density bonus to either partner with that or add on to that.
So this is because the crux of so many conversations that have happened in this community over the last 2 years. And that is, then what if we give a density bonus if we do an upzone, so we have increased capacity as a right, And at the same time, we're saying, which I think we all agree, that it's going to be hard to get the people to work with, but density bonuses or do anything to create affordable housing. We've got all kinds of other things to do. Why are we not then setting up just whoever those private landowners are to just be able to build more dense market rate? That's, I feel like that's this thing we keep.
Oh, I think I see.
Mhm.
Yes.
So if we just
Um,
zone an area, right, with no, I mean, we've talked about inclusionary zoning, not likely to be taken up anyway. So why would we not? And maybe I'm misunderstanding. It sounds like you're saying.
yes.
we could
So
just-
I think what I am proposing is what you think should happen is that there should be a base level of capacity and or upzoning, however, depending on the circumstances of your community. I don't come into know all of your zoning within your community. But that there should be enough ability and base density within your community to build the majority, if not all of your housing needs, because the affordable housing density bonus that it sounds like the community is considering will only be a small portion of the overall housing needs. So um, you, yes, you do need the overall base affordable housing need.
Let me
Or-
try
or-
one more time. Let me try one more
Sorry.
time. I don't know our community and I don't want to put you on the spot about our community. But I'm trying to understand whether our housing need is something beyond what we've been allocated in our housing allocation with the bands of affordability up beyond 120. If we have the capacity already, if we can demonstrate the capacity outside of an up zone for say 80% and above, then what is that additional? I feel like there's a mystery.
Oh, sorry. You have to
additional capacity.
sorry. Thank you for clarifying. So the capacity for housing has to be in a housing typology that is reasonably likely to support that affordability level. If all of your capacity is in single family homes or middle housing, it cannot, by way of any universe that I know of, support households making under 80% AMI for the majority of that housing because their subsidies are not on scale provided for that type of housing. So if there is sufficient capacity of housing within typologies that could accommodate housing affordable to all or at least the lower income levels, which is typically where the gaps are in most communities, then there wouldn't need to be a change in zonings, provided that you could have sufficient capacity of a typology that would match the number of units for that specific need. Now, that being said, we do recommend that jurisdictions then evaluate what other tools are available to encourage that affordable housing, to incentivize it, to reduce the barriers. But the main land capacity analysis findings just needs to have enough of that typology to match that could serve the housing needs at that income level.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question, and I think I know the answer to this, but I feel like that our community would want me to ask this question, one of us to ask this question, and that would just be, to what extent is this part of the analysis? Because it sounds like that, Commerce will have the final say on at least the housing element of the comp plan. So check off. To what extent are the geographical and environmental limitations of the diversity across the jurisdictions that you have to look at, take into consideration? And to what extent I'll just try to combine into one question, and to what extent is the adequacy of the planning for deficiencies in infrastructure taken into consideration? Since that's kind of part of a more holistic look at the comp plan, or are you
Yes.
really in isolation at just these concepts we're talking about?
We do need to look for consistency with the other elements. The key elements that we look for that bearing coordination internally and with the managing director of GMS is what we have been reviewing, and we need to confirm this is the correct interpretation moving forward, is at a minimum checking for that the main capital facility infrastructure is planned for those that housing. So can you accommodate it with a plan in the next 20 years for sewer and water and things like that. We won't be looking for a detailed plan beyond what is required of the GMA, but we are looking for general alignment and that those considerations have been made outside of the housing element. Because if you don't consider those things, then you won't see the housing.
Thank you. I'm gonna see who else wanted to, Councilmember Lant?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. And I am just going to echo, that was my question was about, this conversation or this selection is primarily about housing, but how to balance the rest of the GMA goals in a way that our community feels that the implementation would be realistic and sustainable. Because right now we're waiting on some parts of the comprehensive plan to kind of reveal themselves. We have a groundwater management plan that is still kind of baking. There's some re-review happening on that or some peer reviews. And so with complete certainty, we can't say that the plan that we're going to present to you necessarily is going to be the plan because we're still waiting on some elements ourselves. So how would you consider that situation?
So some of the capital facilities components don't always exactly align with the comprehensive plan timing. So for example, sewer and water plans often do plans every 8 to 10 years. They may not align exactly with the comprehensive plan. So we would be looking for, generally based on the last plan, is there a projection that this growth might be accommodated or that there is a work plan to address it in the future as part of identifying and working through that process, as you said, with that groundwater management plan. For example, do you have a plan to identify if there is, what gaps and mitigation is needed to address the rest of the plan when you get to that point?
Thank you. So it's back to showing our work and showing work.
A lot of showing your work.
Very good. All right. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'm going to highlight that we're technically at time, and that doesn't mean that I'm saying we're shutting down, but we should be trying to wrap it up. Councilmember Nelson?
Yeah, I'll go as fast as I can. Going back to what I was asking about subsidies, I had a question for you. If we were able to show, so say we upzone for 100% affordable housing projects, and say at the participation rate, we did it enough where it showed sufficient capacity to do the 1,139 units. Assuming that situation, could we then cost it out and put the amount we don't have in sort of grants and our funds in gaps in local funding pursuant to 070 2D2? And that would be sufficient?
That is how we are interpreting the case right now. But again, we are watching it because it is under appeal. So just to note that we do, on the adequate provisions piece with that subsidy piece, we do recommend consulting with your legal counsel just because there's a bit up in the air at the moment.
No, that's very helpful. And then I think on just in general, the HMA remedies as far as the by right affordable housing provision, I was noticing in 83511A3, there was a slight difference in language from what you put on the slide, where it specifically said, it wouldn't apply in critical areas or in critical area buffers. It didn't have that extra language about not being able to develop there. Obviously, Bainbridge Island is a critical aquifer recharge area, the entire island. How does that play into it? Are we exempt in general, or is that just a different thing?
We don't believe that Bainbridge Island is exempt because the city still allows development in the island. So even though you are a critical area, aquifer recharge area, you still allow development and more intense development in certain areas. So we don't think the intent of the legislature was to preclude development entirely, but to include it in those very sensitive areas. Now, we are working through that by right affordable housing provision to fully understand what is meant by all of those exemptions. So we will hopefully come out with more information in the future, but based on our discussions and reading of the statute and the intent, the way it is written in the slide is how we are interpreting the intent of the statute.
Okay, just because I noted the where
Yeah, it
development
is.
is not permitted is
Yep,
not
it's a little
really
bit different
statute.
because
Okay.
it's our interpretation to understand how that would actually be applied in a specific situation because Bainbridge Island is unique in that sense. So
Okay,
we
just
want to provide more clarity.
quick ones. On land capacity analysis, does Commerce have a requirement or a preference for modeling likely housing growth over the 20-year planning period versus just looking at full capacity at likely build out?
Probably the latter. What we're looking for is the capacity at likely build outs. You don't need to model what is probably going to happen, just what is likely to happen based on what you allow. So not the full capacity, because we recognize not every parcel is going to build out at full capacity, but what is likely to happen.
Okay, and then I think my final comment is just to echo my colleagues around the larger GMA context. I am one person up here who's concerned about our water supply on Bainbridge Island. Actually, on the south end, KPUD just basically isn't allowing new connections and is basically having us ration water because there's concerns about water. In our draft groundwater management plan, which was recently peer reviewed, it showed steady decline, modeling a steady decline in the aquifers, and the deepest aquifer, which is 75% of the water for Winslow, it showed that in about 50 years, it could potentially drop below sea level, causing seawater intrusion. And so I'm thinking of, O2010, the environment planning goal that mentions quantity and quality of water. 0701, the land use element says we have to protect the quantity and quality of groundwater. And so I think my question is really, at what point is other requirements of the GMA no longer subordinated to the housing element, right? Because I think the way everyone's interpreting it now, it's you must do this amount of housing, but there are other requirements in the GMA. And I'm just wondering, how does Commerce think about that?
Planning is a balancing act. That's what I remember with going to grad school. And what I found so fascinating about planning is that it is so multidimensional and so multifaceted. And there are 15 goals to the Growth Management Act, and they don't all align with each other perfectly. So the goal is to meet each of them the best that you can, understanding that there are competing consequences. And that is why also we have the Growth Management Hearings Board to opine on things. So in this instance, we will be measuring against what the legislature has us to measure against. And then beyond that, with regard to what level of balance is needed, that is up to local jurisdictions and if needed, the Growth Management Hearings Board.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Laura, thank you, first of all, so much really for your patience. And I guess I wanted to ask before we let you go, I don't know what the city manager and the mayor were thinking about. We have this one item that I think will be very brief, which relates to commerce as the second item, and I think has probably been answered. But it feels a little weird to ask Laura to just say goodbye to Laura before we kind of just directly ask that question. And so that is, we have an item, this was an item originally brought forward by Councilmember Nelson regarding provision of Department of Commerce technical assistance directly to the council. And so rather than thanking Laura and saying goodbye, I think it would be appropriate for us to clarify. I think we've heard from you. We're not going to have the opportunity to have you directly advise us. And I think that's one of the reasons it was so I think we all probably very appreciate your patience tonight and hearing our questions. We have many. But it sounds like Commerce is not going to be open to directly advising us. We're going to need to work with our staff to make sure that we have as much transparency as possible to hear what you're telling them. Is that accurate?
Our primary role is to work with staff. We can present on the requirements and our overall recommendations when we get to points that we have specific recommendations on next steps based on, for example, those findings from their submission either now or in the future. But generally speaking, technical assistance, we work with staff because we want them to be able to work with you through these concerns and questions.
Thank you. I guess I wanted to just ask Councilmember Nelson, do you have anything you want to add to that since that was your item?
Yeah, no. And I think this is in some sense what I was thinking about was having, you come here and have us be able to talk to you and ask these questions because this has been extraordinarily helpful. So I think what I would simply ask is it possible to do this again? Would you have us again? You know what I mean? To where we can ask more questions in the future when more things come up when we get farther down the process?
I think that might be possible. Let me just make sure that that aligns with our principles and it would be helpful to understand the parameters of what timing that is because we don't want to circumvent the work that you're doing with your staff. So let me check on that and get back to you. And I'll get back with Patty and to get back with you or the council member or mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I don't think we have any more questions and good night.
Thank you very much.
So I think again, we touched on item B. So the
Right.
item C, yeah,
May I
yes,
just
Mayor.
add to that for me?
Uh-huh.
Item B. And that would be a foolish use of this person's time. She's an expert that's supposed to come in and, excuse me, because I'm the only one who's not a parent, so I'm kind of making a stretch here in my analogy. But, you know, we're a city that's growing, and let's say we have a family that's growing, and instead of a city, it's our house. And we have to adjust. We know we're going to have more growth. So should we add a bedroom? Should we split a bedroom? Should we maybe, find other ways to accommodate our growth? And the family's having fights over this. Is it too expensive? Can we afford it? We really should do it this way. And we're going on and on and on. And we haven't planned for how we're going to take care of this new child. I look at this person coming in as an expert architect and saying, here's how it would work. Dispassionately, just looking at it as a plan. And then here's a recommendation. I think you should probably add a bathroom and a bedroom. So that's what I think her role is as an expert. And with all due respect, we just had an example of how much time this would take away from her and the Commerce doing their work, and that is to advise us on the best way to meet the goals that we must meet by law under the Growth Management Act. So I would like staff to do their work. And then she said, once they have actually something to share with us, that might be appropriate, but we can't micromanage it. I really would pose that vehemently.
I guess I would just follow up and say that this is all about policy, and historically, these have been local policy decisions, and we're all struggling just as Commerce is, how we're going to work together as the state has started to step into our arena. And so I think what we're looking for when we're wanting to talk to the people who are evaluating our policy based on state policy, that it's very helpful to understand how they look at these policy questions. One more thing briefly before we go forward.
No, yeah, I would just say, respectfully, I think the best time potentially for her to come back maybe after they give their recommendations. Because at that point, there's going to be something very tangible that we can try to digest, ask questions about. And that's where I'm coming from as we go through this process. Having that resource, having that dialogue, I, for one, found just that 1 hour to be extraordinarily helpful and extraordinarily educational and extraordinarily meaningful. And so I think it was quite a good use of time personally.
Okay, if we're ready to, Councilman Schneider.
Sorry. So here's a question I want to ask my colleagues. I would have liked to have asked her, but it just felt sort of inappropriate with our timing and all that. So what is our takeaway from the conversation about providing the housing, the density, and I guess it's the typology that really matters here, the typology for our lowest levels of, just 80% and below, or maybe 60% and below. So on the one hand, I heard typology. We need to offer the typology, and, if it gets taken up by market rate, well, okay. But so I thought I heard that. And then I also heard very early on from Councilmember Nelson's questions that, we only get to count 10% of whatever, right? So are those two completely different things how do we bring those together? And what did I miss? Do we have answers for that?
I think what I would say is one thing we might do is move this to potentially the steering committee to kind of digest, along with what maybe our commissioners will have also listened to this. Because otherwise, I think we're looking at a pretty big conversation here right now. I mean, I think that personally, if if the majority of council wants to schedule another time to do some digesting and talking about it, we could do that. I'm not sure. I know I'm very interested in this. I'm not sure all of the council members are, and so we could just kind of find out, do we want to schedule a study session item to talk further about this, or move it to the steering committee for now? Councilmember Fentroy Johnson?
I think we're all interested, and I think we all would like to discuss it. So
Okay.
whether that's I don't think it should just be the steering committee. I think what we should have is what came out of this for discussion. What items, the questions that we asked, what answers we got, and how that's changing what we thought. You know,
Yeah.
like, for instance, we can't use what we already have as part of our over 80% AMI. We
Yeah.
can't do that. So, I think, I don't know if I speak for everybody, but would you all like to take this up at another time?
Okay.
No, I can't make a motion. It's a study
No.
session.
Does everyone want to weigh in on this, or do you have other things you wanted to? Because we could, yeah.
Could I follow on? So I like your idea of taking it to the steering committee, not because we're expecting to get answers in the steering committee, but because we could ask the same question I just asked, listen to staff. Does staff have an interpretation? And if not, then we craft the questions in the steering committee. And then, we bring it back. So that's, I liked your suggestion of steering
This is-
committee for that purpose.
Thank you. That's kind of what I was thinking when you were talking, Councilmember Fentroy Johnson, was, okay, we'd want to structure the conversation so we knew what questions we want staff to talk to, give us feedback on and what we were tackling. So if that's good with you guys, we have a meeting come up next week and we can start talking about
As
what
long
that
as it-
agenda look like.
As long as it comes back to us.
Exactly,
I'm okay.
exactly. And Councilmember Matthews.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor. I think that I agree that we all want to talk about this and touch this, but I do think that the steering committee can get a little bit deeper, maybe go a little bit deeper in the work and bring it back to us. I do think we need another study session to discuss it, but I would also like the steering committee to get a little deeper. And we cannot forget the planning commission, who are the actual ones doing the work. So a way that planning commission could get looped in. Hopefully they're hearing all this. There wasn't much support for a joint planning commission council meeting. There hadn't been in the past, but I'm starting to see that there is time and space for that. So if that is something that from the steering committee maybe comes out of some specific things that planning commission and council can now work on together, that would also be something I think would be great.
Councilmember Land?
And I'll make this brief too. I think just to follow up on Council Member Schneider's point, I think it's incredibly important to have staff involved like right now. The director's been listening, hearing the comments, hearing the answers. I think that there's probably some understanding of where we're going in certain ways or where questions are. And what we've done already and how we can maybe shift it and kind of move around a little bit, but time's ticking. And we can either do this on our time or their time. And I really think we need to put our heads together and go forward to meet these deadlines.
And sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Maybe to change the metaphor a little bit because I'm awkward and I've never had a baby to expand a house. But you mentioned planning, and this is what's really important. And she hasn't even met with our planning staff yet. They have to learn our codes and our zoning and all the abilities and the empty lots and all the rest. We haven't even given them the chance. And so it's sort of like we know our map. But they're like the experts coming in, they're the planners. They go, well, okay, this is where this zone says, what available lots are there? They're going to try to make an informed decision of this is where the best idea for density would be. This would be the best idea for zoning that you might meet some of these housing. Allow the experts to try to do that on their zoning map and help us because they look at it. And then, as I mentioned in the first part, I said, once they have something to present to us, then it would come to it. And I'm glad that Councilmember Nelson came to that same conclusion, which is I said just before he said it. So I think that's what I really am cautioning micromanaging and just we don't have the time for this. We're in February already. We don't have till June. So every time we do this, it's another chunk of time that is taken away from actually moving this ball forward. So I'm trying to be as efficient as possible, and they're coming in as a state by law to do exactly that, to advise and direct. And let's see what they come up with. Let's see what advice they have to share with us, because we better listen to it. Because they're going to give us some ideas. And as I mentioned, I said to her, well, what if we don't? Well, then we're going to have to look at it, and here we are and back to zero. So I would really caution, we really don't have, we're on such a time crunch. We're already in the second month, and we set ourselves a goal every month to June. And so let's try to keep to our own self-described goals of something that previous council passed an ordinance last year, because that is now law here. So let's try to stay to these deadlines. Let's have a little self-discipline and do this as appropriately as we said we would.
So I think it's because we're in a crunch that there's a feeling here of a little bit of anxiety over where at the end of this, we will make the policy decisions and we will work with staff in between. And so will Planning Commission to develop our policies. It's not going to be just a simple adoption of like the plan isn't going to be handed to us by Commerce. So this, I think there's an appetite on the council to be able to do a little bit of digesting and understand what we heard. I think that, the steering committees next week, I would imagine we'd be on an agenda for a few weeks after that. So it's not going to happen immediately. Hopefully staff will be working at that point already with Commerce too. And, what's missing from this conversation right now, of course, is staff. And at the steering committee, it's one of the great things about that is that it's not just the Planning Commission representatives of the city council, it's also staff. So we can all just kind of digest this on Monday and see if there's what agenda items come out. So I continue to fully endorse us planning to bring something back along these lines. I think we're hearing that from the majority of council. Real quick, last comments from Councilmember Lance and then Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, and I'll be brief and respectfully, it's like the baby's overdue. And when the baby's overdue, they bring in experts. The mom's not just laying there by herself waiting for a baby to emerge. The experts come in, there's people holding their hand, there's drugs given, the insurance people are involved, somebody's taken off time of work. This is the time when I expect extra help. I expect if we don't ask Commerce, they won't. So let's ask them. All they can say is no. But if they come in and they can move us along faster and better, I say, let's go for it. But definitely bringing in staff like early now and getting everybody involved in this is what we need to do. Thank you.
Councilmember Nelson.
I move that this matter be discussed further at next week's steering committee along with the future study session.
There's a second?
Sure, second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Nay? Any opposed? All right, unanimously carried. We will do that. So let's move on to item C, which is receive presentation on city land capacity analysis methodologies for the updates to the comprehensive plan and Winslow sub-area plan.
Good evening again, Council, and thank you for that robust discussion. I think that I heard a pretty good summary at the end, so staff understands your intended next steps, and we'll be ready to work through to support that. Our next item is to receive a presentation on city land capacity analysis methodologies that were used in the updates that are being used in the updates for the comprehensive plan and Winslow sub-area plan. We have our Planning and Community Development Director, Patty Chernus, here to give a couple of introductory comments, and also the consultants from LMN who did this work to provide you with some additional information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, City Manager. Good evening again, Patty Charnas, Planning and Community Development. I have the unenviable task of trying to introduce a very technical subject, namely land capacity analysis. Under the Growth Management Act, cities planning under the Act must demonstrate that their comprehensive plans and zoning regulations can realistically accommodate the growth allocated to them through the countywide planning policies. For us, our countywide planning policies are collaboratively developed and given to the cities and to the county through the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council. So that happened a while ago. A land capacity methodology is a highly technical tool And that's why it really is properly done by experts, not by generalists, like planning managers. But it is a highly quantitative tool that it does parcel by parcel level analyses to determine whether a city has sufficient capacity to accommodate its allocated 20-year housing, population, and employment growth targets. Land capacity typically involves such very granular things as parcel inventories, existing zoning calculations, and land adjustments for things like critical area buffers, roadway right-of-ways, and other deductions. Land capacity is especially important now because cities have to, for the first time ever, demonstrate sufficient capacity for housing at all income levels. That's the plan for and accommodate clause that Laura Hodgson just described to us. Now, while GMA requires consistency between city and county plans, because we all work together, cities almost always conduct their own more granular land capacity analysis from the county. The cities of Bremerton, Port Orchard, and Poulsbo all have modified the Kitsap County land capacity analysis for their own purposes. Again, this is common. Bainbridge Island, because of its vast, 91%, vast low-density area away from urban levels of service that are available here in Winslow, make it less easy to accommodate multifamily, more dense zoning, and therefore that area wouldn't necessarily be relied upon to support our housing allocations like Winslow, which is supported by our long-term growth strategies that have always said over the years, well before I started, that Winslow was the place to situate all or a majority of our growth. But outside of Winslow, the balance of the island, our low-density conservation area, looks a lot like unincorporated Kitsap County, which is so it makes sense for us to have applied the county's methodology to the areas outside of Bainbridge to a majority percentage. However, this is the area where we also deduct more for environmentally sensitive areas, open space, forestry, and rights of way, because they're larger out in our less dense zones. So those would be reducing the capacity even further. The island's capacity analysis inside the Winslow Town Center, however, does not have the same characteristics as the balance in our conservation area. We don't have as many reductions needed across the board for critical areas, rights of way, because it is already more densely zoned and therefore more densely developed. The city has been working with LMN architects since the beginning of the Winslow Subarea Plan. They're the group that was expertly helped us through the visioning process for the Winslow Subarea Plan, the priority identification, and substantially took all that public feedback from the many months and many public events that they helped us put on and they synthesized that for us, helped us come up with the alternatives that were analyzed in the draft environmental impact statement. So it is my pleasure to introduce AP Amrine and Riley McPhee from LMN Architects, and we look forward to their presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Patty. And thank you to the council for the invite. Deputy Mayor, nice to see you, Mayor, and formal council members. Nice to see you. We are eager to answer the questions that you asked us this evening. It's been a few years since we've been here in person, and so we wanted to take a step back and describe a little bit of that planning process that Patty mentioned. And then we're going to get into some of the technical information, some of which has already been covered this evening around capacity requirements generally, land capacity analysis, specifically how we did this in your zone, in the Winslow sub-area, what our methodology was there, and how we think we can apply next steps to meet Commerce's goals and ultimately get this plan approved. We are not the only consultant on the team. We're joined by many others also on the call here this evening. So we're joined by Strategic Economics, Dina Belzer is the principal there. We've been supported by EA Engineering doing our environmental analysis, and Tool Design doing the multimodal planning in the districts. As Patty mentioned as well, this process has been many steps. So we started with a very careful analysis of your community. We often call this listening and learning. We synthesized that analysis into opportunities and constraints with you, with this council. We produced a vision that would drive our work. With this vision, we drove or developed a series of planning alternatives. And from those alternatives, we are now in the phase where we're working on that preferred alternative. That's the line there in the middle. You'll see above and below the blue. These are interactions that we had with you, with other of your advisory groups and boards and councils, as well as interactions with your public. And so the critical part in this diagram is that for each of these steps, we've engaged you, the council, we've engaged the public, and we've engaged experts and leaders within your community. And here we find ourselves towards the end of this process. Here's an image of that very early engagement. In this engagement, some of you were there. We met with parks, and we met with arts, and we met with business owners and landowners. Again, you'll recognize some of the folks in this image, and we've really appreciated the council's involvement through this process. What I think is actually so cool about this process is that we didn't have separate processes. The council was there along the way with the process, with the public. This is democracy in action, and it was really exciting to be a part of. Overall, through with your community, we think we engaged 1,500 people. These were through a series of surveys, workshops, open houses. And you can see on the left side of this image, our strategy was that, of course, the public was the backbone of our engagement, but there were others that we were pulling into this engagement. So you, the council, elected officials in the city boards and commissions, we worked very closely with organizations and entities. These are the kind of civic leaders within your community. And we also had a strategy of targeting specifically underrepresented groups. And so some of those groups you can see here on the screen. We had targeted outreach with youth at the schools, targeted outreach with workers around their commutes, as well as a number of engagement and virtual workshops. Later in the process, again, here in this room, you can see this was our visioning workshop. This was really exciting. It's exciting to see the energy that your community brings to this process, to the passion that they have for this place. It's infectious, truth be told. And again, members of your community on this council were here through the process. And again, we've really appreciated this combined process where we were doing everything together with the public and with the council. Based on this outreach and engagement, we developed a series of themes with you and with your community. You can see them here on the screen. They were around housing, they were around amenities, zoning and planning, open space and natural systems, community feel, resilience and climate. I heard many of these things, in fact, come up this evening from various council members. These have been and continue to be our concerns as well. Under housing, I'll just point out a couple here that some of our themes and goals were around supporting urban scale multifamily housing, providing a diversity of housing types for diversity of people, including a range of affordable and mixed income development, and locating new housing and amenities near transit centers that could accommodate density more easily. The vision statement, like these themes, we produced with this body. And in fact, this body had a very close relationship with this vision statement. So I'll just read the top line that Winslow 2044 envisions a diverse, vibrant, and complete community with a unique sense of place, a vital center of the island that fosters a welcoming environment, a community that focuses on environmental resilience and sustainability, that supports local businesses and educational institutions, that provides amenities such as healthcare and childcare and services to the residents, that fosters diversity and inclusion, and a thriving community for all, that creates housing that's affordable and accessible, and that prioritizes pedestrian and multimodal transportation modes. So with those those themes and with that vision in place, we worked with you and with your community and with the staff to generate 3 alternatives that we evaluated through the EIS process or the DEIS process. Alternative one, and this is always an alternative in any planning process, was a no action alternative. This doesn't mean, and it critically doesn't mean no change. It means that we're taking no land use action and that we would change as we have changed under current land use policies. Alternative two, we branded Go Up. This was a denser alternative that looked at creating walkable corridors, specifically around High School Road and the Winslow corridor. Alternative three, we titled Go Out. This was a less dense option that included, that removed some of the single family zoning that's currently in the Winslow sub-area and added in some zones to the north. And we evaluated these through the DES process. So in the course of this planning process, we received new guidance from Commerce, new guidance from the state, and Riley is going to pick up the story from there and kind of work us back to where we are today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. So we're going to kind of start with what we're trying to achieve here, what the actual requirements are as of this moment. And so just kind of very high level looking back, I know Laura spoke to a lot of this earlier, but the Growth Management Act from 1990 required a statewide framework that requires the comprehensive plans that must provide sufficient land capacity for development. Then came buildable lands in 1997. HB 1220 in 2021 was really one of the real things that kind of changed the discourse. It went from encouraging affordable housing to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments. So that was kind of a paradigm shift for jurisdictions to take the affordability more seriously. And then in 2023, Kitsap County adopted their countywide planning policies, which include specific housing capacity targets for different income bands. So I think you're all pretty familiar with this. This is kind of far away on the screen up here, but so these are the actual requirements. This is, again, I'm sure you're familiar, but the total requirements that Bainbridge has to provide is 1,977 new units. And then in these different income bands, there are specific capacity targets that the city needs to hit. So that's kind of all the policy work that's being done is feeding into the land capacity analysis, which we're going to talk about. And the goal is to show how it is meeting these requirements. So this is from the latest Commerce guidance document, which I believe was included in your packet. And so this shows how Commerce is looking for jurisdictions to go to basically show that they're meeting that affordable requirement. And so the next slide here will kind of show this more granularly, but basically we're trying to summarize land capacity by zone. We're trying to categorize zones by different housing types and density levels, then relate those zoning categories to different income levels. And then if a deficit is found, the policy needs to change. So this is a table that I think is super helpful from that same document. It's in your packet. I think this says a lot of what Laura spoke to tonight, which is this is specifically in higher cost communities. What this is showing is, again, on the left, these zone categories looking at low density to high rise, the typical housing types that are allowed within those zoning types, the type of income levels that are supported by market rate development in those zones, and then the type of income levels that are supported with incentives and subsidies. And so what we take from this chart is that low-rise multifamily and mid-rise multifamily are necessary but not sufficient to meet the very low income units. So a lot of what we're trying to do with our analysis is to show sufficient capacity of low-rise multifamily and mid-rise multifamily units, which can themselves provide capacity for income levels at 80% to 120% AMI. You can see in the very center of the screen there. And then with subsidies or other incentives, they can provide capacity for the very low income levels. So the City of Bainbridge Island Housing Action Plan in 2023 showed a shortage of affordable housing. The city has studied policy alternatives in the DIS that AP just shared. The LCA projections, the LCA's land capacity analysis, the LCA projections must demonstrate required dwelling unit capacity across affordability bands. And then critically, if the projections do not show sufficient capacity, the policy direction needs to change. So the policy direction is feeding into the LCA, and the LCA is spitting out the results that need to comply with the requirements. And so that's all very pretty straightforward. I think there's a lot of nuance in what Laura was saying, and there's more coordination we have to do, but we do want to emphasize that this has kind of been an evolving process over the life of this project. So in 2021, Kitsap County released the Buildable Lands Report with their Buildable Lands Report, and I'll use this term BLR a number of times, this BLR Appendix A Land Capacity Guidance. Later in 2021, HB 1220 was enacted, which is the state requirement for a lot of these affordability requirements. Our Winslow subarea planning process began in 2022. It actually preceded the Bainbridge comp plan planning process, which started in 2023. Commerce released their final guidance, or at that time, final guidance on complying with HB 1220 in 2023. Kitsap County released the affordability unit ban requirements that I put on screen in 2023. Our team was briefly on hold. Our DEIS, which I'm sure you've all seen, went out in 2024. And then more recently, over the summer, the Growth Management Hearings Board determination on Mercer Island and Kitsap County, which Laura mentioned, came down and had some changes on the way Commerce interprets some of these things. Our consultant team was on hold for most of the second half of last year while the Planning Commission was reviewing the projections and the alternatives that we put forward. And then when we resumed in January, there's been this flurry of activity. Commerce updated their guidance. We received some new policy direction from the Planning Commission, and Bainbridge was selected for Housing Accountability Review. So there's a lot happening. We're trying to give you kind of the latest and greatest here, but keep in mind that the process has been kind of evolving as we've been going through it. So I want to start here as we start talking about land capacity analysis, because Councilmember Nelson flagged this in the agenda item for this discussion. And so this is a footnote from the 2024 DEIS. And so this uses these terms that I think are sort of confusing, which says that the area outside of Winslow is calculating capacity at likely build out, not likely growth in the 20-year planning period. So I think we'll probably have more conversation about this. And I think Laura spoke about this a certain way, and I'll speak about it a certain way and show some sources here. But in our understanding, both of these terms are not technical terms. They're not legal terms that Commerce is using. So I think they have potentially created some confusion in their use in that footnote. Both the BLR, which is again, that's the county methodology that was used outside the island, and the Winslow methodologies are based on the same framework, and they're designed to comply with the same requirements. But there are differences in methodology within this framework due to differences in the character of the areas being evaluated. And we'll get into those in a little bit more detail here. So this is the framework, and I call it a framework because it allows quite a bit of flexibility within the framework. But this is from the BLR 2021 document. This is their guidance. It's a very long appendix document, but essentially, I'll try to be brief here, but this walks us through 9 steps. So step 1 is a infrastructure review. Step 2 is define and develop status and classify parcels in certain ways. Exclude parcels unlikely to develop, identify critical areas, identify future roads and right-of-way needs, identify future public facility needs, account for unavailable lands. So that's sort of lands that we probably won't develop because of market reasons. Determine net acres by zone. So the net acreage that is sort of available for development after those other factors are taken out. And then apply density in each zone to calculate housing unit capacity is step 8 there, second from the bottom. And then step 9 is apply household size to calculate population capacity. So obviously, within each one of those steps, there's a huge amount of assumptions and processes that go into calculating that. This is Kitsap County's 2021 framework for complying with state requirements. So it does allow for variation and flexibility within that framework. This framework is the framework for both the city's 2021 BLR analysis and the 2024 DEIS analysis for the area outside of Winslow and the ongoing Winslow analysis. So the changes we're talking about all occur within that framework. And then finally, this framework predates HB 1220, so it does not include any methodology for projecting affordable units. This is also from that 2021 document. So this is a line from the introduction that says, cities may employ variations to the assumptions using the methodology with proper show your work documentation to account for local circumstances. So Patty just spoke to this. I think Laura spoke to this also. Below that are just some snips to show that there are full appendix sections to that report that document not only Bainbridge Island's assumptions that went into it, but also the different assumptions that went into the city of Bremerton and Port Orchard. And then I want to zoom in particularly on step 8, because I think that this is kind of the crux of the footnote to the DEIS and some of what Councilmember Nelson was getting at, which is sort of once you have the amount of acreage that is potentially available for development, what kind of density are you applying in your projections? What does it mean to apply density? So I hope this is larger for you than it is for me. But I'll try to read it. So this is from the BLR. This is still from the 2021, and this is the document that went into the methodology that the city is using for outside of Winslow. So this says, assumed densities are those densities in which future development is expected to occur. And so then that goes on. Achieved density can be a starting point for determining assumed density. However, jurisdictions must draw upon local circumstance. I'll kind of skip to the bottom. So always consider the impact of regulations such as setbacks, height limits, and parking requirements on development feasibility when selecting a reasonable assumed density. So this doesn't actually refer to like maximum FAR or maximum density. This specifically speaks to densities in which future development is expected to occur based on a variety of local factors. This is the 20. No, thanks. I'll just lean more over this. This is the 2026. This is the latest document from Commerce. This, again, is from the document that was in the council packet. This is specifically guidance for complying with HB 1220, but it speaks to land capacity analysis. So this, again, is speaking to the density component in particular, and it says jurisdictions should establish assumed densities for each residential use. And the second highlight, since the LCA is a forward-looking analysis, jurisdictions should focus on the level of development expected to occur during the planning period. And I'll just keep going here. So assumed densities should consider the maximum densities allowed under the zoning. So they should consider the maximum densities, as well as historic trends and achieved residential densities, as well as factors which may cause trends to change in the future. In some cases, achieved densities will be similar to maximum densities. However, many factors beyond the control of cities and counties can influence the level of future development. Therefore, compare allowed densities. So you heard a lot of this from Laura. This is not very clear cut. And there's a lot of look to the historical precedent if you can, but if you can't, show your work and make reasonable assumptions. So both the BLR methodology and the HB 1220 guidance from Commerce are both intended to project the level of development expected to occur during the planning period. Neither of these analyses is intended to calculate the maximum possible capacity for development. And a plan that assumed that all possible development would occur within the study period would not meet Commerce requirements without context-specific justification. Okay, I'm going to take just a brief pause here for everyone to process, and then we're going to talk specifically about our methodology for the area of Winslow. So the Winslow methodology, so again, our starting point was the 2021 Kitsap County BLR methodology, but this methodology was designed by the county to evaluate relatively low-value rural parcels under current zoning. So the results in some assumptions that are, this results in some assumptions that are inappropriate for Winslow. The parcels in Winslow are more urban. They're typically higher value than the parcels in the rest of the county and on the rest of the island. And so different development patterns are expected to occur. In the DEIS alternative studied, areas of Winslow were evaluated for significant upzoning, while zoning the rest of the island remained more consistent. And upzoning makes projection more difficult because it isn't captured in existing data. And we'll show a specific example where that's the case. This is just a simple map that shows the land value per square foot on Bainbridge Island. And so you can just see, obviously, the property values along the water are very high, but then Winslow, it's very concentrated in Winslow. The land values per square foot are very concentrated. They're not as concentrated on the rest of the island. And so, again, that's one of many factors that goes into influencing the land capacity analysis. And so a good, rigorous land capacity analysis is calibrated to account for these differing factors. On the left is kind of a typical snapshot of most of the island. On the right is Winslow. Again, they're just very different existing development patterns and densities that also play into this. And then another point here is on the left, this is all of Kitsap County. There are over 118,000 tax parcels in Kitsap County. So the BLR methodology needs to apply to all of those. And its goal is to get a reasonable result when all of those are kind of averaged and taken together. The city of Bainbridge Island has over 11,000 tax parcels, but the area of Winslow sub-area of Winslow has less than 2,500 parcels. So it's much easier to sort of spot check our work and go in and see what a given parcel is projecting, and is that correct, right? That's not something you can really do when you're analyzing 118,000 parcels, but it is something where we can show the results that we're getting, and work with the city staff and try to understand, is this methodology appropriate for the conditions that we're seeing in Winslow or not. So here's one specific example, and this is fairly technical, but this is a fairly technical topic. So I hope you're ready for that. This is one of the steps from the BLR methodology. This applies to mixed use development. So what this step says is it's trying to evaluate whether a parcel has the potential to redevelop or not, whether we should project capacity for it or say there's no capacity on this parcel. So the bottom part of that text says, for any parcel not classified as vacant or pipeline, assign underutilized, which would mean we think there is capacity there that we should calculate, if it meets any of the following criteria. So criteria 1, it's located in a mixed use commercial or industrial zone, and it's occupied by a detached single family home, cottage, mobile manufactured home, garage or shed. So the existing use is considered a low, an underutilized use relative to the zoning. Or criteria 2, the property's improvement to land value ratio is less than 0.5. So, if the value of a structure was say $100,000 and the value of the land was say $100,000, that ratio would be 1. And if the structure value starts dropping, that ratio goes down. So this is trying to screen for low value structures on higher value parcels. This is and I should say critically, that is the only way that the BLR methodology basically screens to see whether properties, mixed use or commercial properties, are underutilized or have development capacity on them or not. This is a particular parcel in Winslow. Some of you may know it's in High School Road. On the bottom left there is just the same text again for reference from the BLR methodology. So this is in the High School Road zone. It is not vacant. It is not a pipeline parcel, which means there's a permit in and we kind of know how it's going to develop. It is in a mixed use zone. It is not a single family home, cottage, mobile, manufactured home, garage, or shed. The latest tax data on this shows us that the assessed improvement value is $3.9 million. This is a new Walgreens. So it's a pretty new, relatively, I assume, relatively nice facility that costs a fair amount to build. The assessed land value is $1.7 million. And so the improvement value over the land value is 2.28. And so the result is 2.28 is much larger than 0.5. Therefore, the BLR methodology tells us this parcel will not redevelop. So again, because the value of the structure is quite a bit higher than the value of the land, it says it will not develop. But in reality, so the lot size here is 68,000 square feet. the basic maximum allowable FAR currently is 0.3. The current maximum allowable development then, where FAR, you multiply the lot size by the FAR to determine the allowable square footage of the building. So multiplying 68,000 by 0.3, you get a current maximum allowable development of about 20,000 square feet. The current existing development, that Walgreens, is about 14,000 square feet. So the existing square footage compared to what is potentially allowed under the current zoning means it's about 70% utilized. So that's fairly good. It's not max, it's not at capacity, but it's pretty utilized. And so we might say, it might develop, but there's not a ton of development pressure on that. There's not a lot of unrealized development that would make it worth it to redevelop that parcel. However, there have been a number of different options analyzed, but DEIS Alternative 2 looked at upzoning High School Road to a 3.5 FAR. So under a 3.5 FAR, multiplying that by the lot size of 68,000 square feet, you could develop 238,000 square feet of building on that site. So the existing square footage of about 14,000 square feet relative to the new building that you could potentially build of 238,000 square feet means that site is only 6% utilized. So in reality, under an upzone, there's a really significant likelihood that that site would redevelop because there's a huge amount of capacity that's left on the table there in that upzone. The problem is that when a property is upzoned, the land value is expected to increase. It's basically value creation for the landowner. So the existing land value calculation, which the BLR uses, it's not applicable, right? Because it's using the existing land value, but what we need to screen for is the projected land value. And because there isn't a simple way of calculating future land value based on an upzone, we've added a new operation to look at essentially, it's what the BLR does on residential parcels, which is look at, on residential parcels, it looks at the existing number of dwelling units compared to the capacity for dwelling units, and it uses a threshold to determine if that parcel is underutilized. We're now doing the same thing with FAR and just saying directly, what's the comparison between the existing square footage on the site and what could be potentially built. And if it crosses a certain threshold, we're saying not that it will develop, but that it at least has the potential to develop, and that then becomes a parcel that moves along in the analysis rather than being screened out. This is just one instance where the BLR methodology is inappropriate for Winslow. In this particular case, that change that we made to the methodology resulted in an increased capacity projection relative to the BLR methodology because the BLR was just screening out all of those parcels that may have redeveloped under an upzone. We're now, that's part of the current analysis. In other instances, the change to the methodology resulted in a reduced capacity projection, but in each instance, the goal is to increase realism and accuracy based on the conditions that are specific to Winslow. This refinement makes the Winslow methodology a more realistic estimate of the level of development expected to occur during the planning period, which is the Commerce requirement. And I also want to speak specifically to Councilmember Nelson's question about the June 2025 interim capacity analysis, which followed the DEIS and was delivered in June. So that was not a different, it was not a fundamentally different analysis. That was working within the same framework. So we had, at the time, we had rebuilt the model so that it could run algorithmically rather than through a series of manual operations in GIS. During that process, we identified some other instances where the BLR methodology was resulting in outcomes that were not appropriate for Winslow. For example, the example I just gave. So some additional adjustments were made, some of the probability variables to reflect changing market conditions, since we had previously done that in 2023-24. So these were refinements to the Winslow methodology. This was not a fundamental new approach. And then to close here on next steps. So I mentioned already, so our consultant team was on hold from July to January. Commerce made some updates to their methodology in January, and we're still, we've been processing those. And then the Planning Commission provided new policy direction at the end of 2025. And so going from a mandatory inclusionary housing policy, which was evaluated in the DEIS, to a voluntary inclusionary housing policy actually requires modifications to the methodology itself to project utilization rates or participation rates for each of the voluntary programs. And those need to be consistent with updated Commerce guidance. Our understanding is that we are turning over our capacity analysis and the results to the city to provide to Commerce by the end of the month, which is a week from Friday. So we're down to it on this first round of projections, and we're working really hard to try to accommodate and update the methodology to accommodate the voluntary inclusionary housing policy directed by the Planning Commission. And we're hoping to have results end of this week, early next week, so that we can get those over to Commerce. Thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Who was first? Councilmember Schneider?
All right, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So interesting choice of examples, right? I think we all can instantly relate to something that we've seen in just, recent years. And so the idea that a building that was built less than 10 years ago, I think, it's sort of hard to believe that it would have a high likelihood of being redeveloped. But I remember asking that question, really wanting in my heart to sort of preserve existing buildings and all that. And I remember asking my dad that, decades ago. And he said, well, those buildings are only really meant to last 15 or 20 years. And I went, what? So my question to you is, what's the likely lifespan of a building like that? Now, I get that that's not the only question to ask, right? Another question is, well, some people don't care what the lifespan of a building is. They're just going to tear it down if they can make more money by putting something else there. But from sort of a conservation of resources potential, what sort of methodology do you use to supplement what you just talked about with the likelihood of a building like that being redeveloped? Because 15 years or 20 years goes by really quickly, and it's certainly within the time frame of this conversation.
No, I think it's preferable to be able to have that question answered as it's asked.
I think the short answer is, it's a good question, and it's something that should be considered and evaluated. The methodology, our methodology does not account for the age of the building, because as I said, what we're trying to do is capture the sort of developer mentality, development conditions that as they actually happen in the world. And so while it is not, depending on your frame of mind, I think there are really good reasons for trying to preserve existing buildings. But as I put in that example, if that site is 7% utilized and a developer can build, 220,000 new square feet, which could be, a 10-story, there's height limits also, but that's a big building. An additional 220,000 square feet is a very large building. They're not going to be deterred by the age of the building. And unless there are other development regulations that are put in place, that wouldn't hinder development.
Councilmember Land?
Okay, we'll just run down the line here. Thank you for that, all that information. A couple questions. So when you do your high view of the lots, and specifically the Winslow sub-area lots, are you just looking strictly at the size of the lots and if they're in residential zones, period? Or are you doing a deep dive into how many of those lots are actually in recorded subdivisions? They're in plats. They have agreements that are underlying the likelihood of them, without consensus of a whole group of people, that area will likely not redevelop, even though you've said it's got potential to. How did you look at those things?
Another really good question. I mean, the BLR methodology does not account for that. I think one of the fundamental challenge of this process at any scale, but even at the scale of Winslow, is it needs to be an automated, at least theoretically, an automated process where you don't have to read through a covenant to do a projection. And so the county, when they're providing a methodology to evaluate 117,000 parcels, there's going to be stuff they miss, right? There are going to be covenants that aren't captured. And so individual parcels are not going to be accurately reflected. The goal is to get something that on average, when applied across the parcel group, is going to be as accurate as possible. And so I think this speaks a little bit to what Laura was saying earlier. Like if we knew that every single parcel in Winslow had a restrictive covenant on it that prohibited future development for certain reasons, we would try to factor that in. But I think that is not something that is currently factored into the methodology.
But you realize that there are many, many, many platted lots in this specific area. So I think there's some areas of the island that you could get away with that plus or minus of error. But I think in Winslow specifically, especially the newer neighborhoods, I think there's many, many subdivisions that have, large recorded systems. So I would think that that would have been actually taken into account as a major factor of weighting how much capacity we had. And my one last question is, as far as an automated system, and I'm going to beat you to the punch, AI, how much of this is you pull a trigger and see what other jurisdictions have come out with, and how much of this is automated through like the county's usual methodology? Does that make sense?
Are you asking about AI?
Yeah.
Use of AI?
Mhm.
No use of AI.
Okay.
I wish we could use AI more.
Just checking.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nelson?
No, listen, I would say I very much appreciate the presentation. It's very helpful. And I think, are you guys able to share a copy of that presentation with us? It's not just to sort of chew on. So, going back to the footnote, I know it's not technical. I know it's not what Commerce said, but is it accurate? Because you're sort of questioning the way it was said. Is it accurate that outside of Winslow, it's modeling likely build out, whereas inside it is just the 20-year planning period?
I think they are both, again, like I said, they are both trying to comply with the same requirements. I think that I can't speak to the methodology that we weren't involved in the methodology that was used for the area outside Winslow. LMN was only involved with the area inside Winslow. And so our analysis working with the city was that it made sense to assume that there would be the development would be further from reaching its maximum capacity inside Winslow than what was used to calculate the area outside Winslow. And part of that has to do with upzoning also, right? The area outside Winslow wasn't being considered for, I think there may have been some very small rezonings, but there wasn't a big increase in capacity, whereas inside Winslow, especially for the DEIS options, we were looking at, in some cases, a really substantial increase in allowable FAR. So we were much further from the existing level of development was much further from the potential level of future development.
And just what you did inside Winslow, were you only looking at the 20-year planning period, or did you look at what was likely to develop or what likely would build out would be based off of the current or hypothetical zoning? Or were you just limiting to what would develop in the 20-year planning period? That's kind of what I'm hung up on.
Well, so I think what we tried to cite in that presentation is both the BLR methodology and the county guidance for HB 1220 is supposed to look at the planning period. I mean, they are both studies that are about a planning period. And so our analysis was looking at what level of development is expected to occur within the 20-year planning period.
Okay, so the answer is yes. Okay, okay. And because I'm just trying to understand, if you did look at likely build out, even in Winslow, would that show more capacity or less capacity under current zoning?
And by when you say likely build out,
I mean, likely build out based on the zoning, if you took it to its sort of logical extreme.
like maximum possible.
Not maximum possible, likely, but not under any time frame limitations.
I'm not aware of technical guidance that differentiates between those standards. I mean, I think that, what the land capacity analysis does is it first sort of calculates given a bunch of deductions for things like critical areas and roads and things like that, how much land is then available to develop. And then it says multiply that by a density factor that is reasonable based on past, ideally historical projections, but reasonable factors. So I think it's probably true that if you said, to me, if you said there's no limit on the horizon, there's no time limit, to me that would be equivalent to sort of maximum possible. That would be multiplying your available development land by the maximum density allowed under the zoning. Be sort of full maximum build out. But that is explicitly not what the Commerce Guidance asks us to do. They ask us to look at reasonable development factors, which I think is what controls for the 20-year period.
Okay. And then as far as the actual proposed, applying the proposed zoning, that's also just over the 20-year planning period. So when you look at the capacity that's created under proposed zoning changes, you're only looking at 20 years. You're not looking at the maximum that it could build out, right? Are you doing the same thing for current zoning and sort of proposed zoning is what I'm getting at?
The capacity projection is only run on a zoning condition. So for the three alternatives that were studied, or the preferred alternative that we're working towards, it's basically, it's the new zoning map, right? It's the new zoning map that Planning Commission has handed down. We're assuming, or the study assumes, that zoning remains in place for the planning period. Does that answer the question?
No, I'm just saying, but you're still just looking at the planning period, right? You're not looking beyond that, just as you are with current zone.
The analysis assumes that whatever zoning, like in the case of Winslow, like what our latest analysis says is that, starting at the point of the analysis, certain areas are upzoned according to Planning Commission recommendations. That is then the zoning condition for the duration of the planning period. And so we are projecting under those conditions. We're not assuming that there will be future zoning changes in the future. Sorry if I'm not understanding the question.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not getting through. I'll ask one more time, and then I'm just trying to say, when you're looking at proposed zoning changes, right? You're only thinking about what capacity is created over the planning period. You're not thinking about any build out that could occur after the planning period, right?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Matthews.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Thank you so much for being here, Element. It's really great to see you. It feels like it's been a while. It was pretty cool to look back and see ourselves aging in real time. So that's always great. I just had more of a comment, I think, than a question. So it's very interesting, that parcel that you chose, which is the Walgreens. The photo was actually before. Now it's an affordable housing development. So it's really a great example of seeing, actually, it was not as unrealistic as those changes could seem. And then this was just a suggestion for my colleague, because I think these are great questions and I get where you're going. I think someone or an entity missing from this equation is the county, and that's where those numbers come from. I think so. It's where our initial, the KRCC, the initial allocation of the numbers. So I think maybe we could, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? I guess I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do kind of want to see if I understand. I think what were you talking about? Were you saying you're asking in determining our existing capacity, only what is expected to build in 20 years is being looked at? Then when in determining what we're going to get from proposed zoning, we're only looking at bit 20. So no one's talking about what the full build out would eventually potentially be. I think that's what I'm hearing. Okay. Mayor
Okay.
Moriarty.
Yep. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just want to end it on a light note, and thank you, Councilmember Matthews, because you kind of jumped the gun on me. But everybody here knows that I love sci-fi. So when I was highlighted, it was amazing. It went back in time where I had dark hair. So I appreciate that very much.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Looks like not. Thank you so much for coming and providing all this information. I think it was all we understand better. I really appreciate it. Thank you. So I think that our last item. Oh, yep, committee reports.
Oh.
Okay, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Today we had the Kitsap Transit meeting. One thing I want to highlight and give kudos to the agency. After the Seahawks won the Super Bowl and then they decided when they're going to have the parade, the agency had 5 days to figure out what to do. They overloaded their fast ferries where they're double shifted. They managed it very well. People were very happy. That agency really is reflective and nimble, and it's a really good thing to be that they served all our community. A personal note, on Thursday is the Day of Remembrance. That's when Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the executive order that started all the unconstitutional actions, which tend to be being repeated right now. And at the site, if you're welcome to go there, the Parks Foundation is having a day cleanup, and so there's still opportunities to clear out weeds and such for the upcoming March 30th event. And I had one other item. Oh, the Public Art Committee met, and they are moving forward on some poetry selection process. The city and the Public Art Committee are working out what that process might be.
Not sure who's next. How about Council Member Matthews?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. So just one recap, Planning Commission met this past Thursday. There were either 3 or 4 public commenters, and then Planning Commission got right to work. I believe every motion was made or every vote was unanimous, and they were really doing some good work. They're working through the elements of the comprehensive plan. So just a couple, they talked about 13.1, dark skies. They were interested in invasive species, which were some things that we hadn't thought about, and having a specific campaign that addresses invasive species and encouraging residents to look for and report them, as well as preserving existing farmland and encouraging small-scale farming. And they decided not to go through each of our motions individually and work them in until they had them all in one as one body, as one body of work, but they did get a chance to add Councilmember Schneider's motion, and that was added to policy HO 311 unanimously. And they also worked on HO 6.6, which was to change the language to encourage development and conservation programs that co-locate housing and land conservation. So really, really good work done. I won't go through all of it, but it's really great to be back with the Planning Commission. Some of us went to see the Port Gamble water waste treatment facility this morning, myself, Councilmember Lant, and Councilmember Nelson, as well as Malcolm Gander, a member of one of our community member. And it was really great to see some of that. We learned lots from KPUD, as well as heard some of what Councilmember Nelson was referring to earlier with our needs for conservation efforts. So I'm sure we'll talk about that more. And then last but not least, we lost Jesse Jackson today. So I just wanted to think about him a little bit and to really think about many of the things he did for his country. And I still remember that Sesame, there's something when I was really little, I am somebody. So just everyone remember you are somebody, and sending love to everyone today.
Thank you. Councilmember Lant?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I just want to give a shout out to Mayor Morawaki, who I saw at the WashDOT open house last week regarding the proposed roundabout at 305 and High School Road. It was a very well-attended function. Many people in the parking lot digesting what they had heard, and more to come on that. I believe March 24th, WashDOT will be here at City Hall during a council meeting to have another presentation of what their proposal is. So put that on your calendar, folks. And I wanted to give a little shout out to one of our community members who is reaching out to get the city involved in World Cup stuff. There is a big deal going on in different cities. And our city is slowly moving our way to having some functions. So June 12th and July 19th, Bainbridge Rowing Club will have some activation events for the two matches or more than two matches that will be happening those days. And then Pleasant Beach Linwood Center. So moving down these activation parties, if you will, these watch parties in June, late June for some more. So just giving a shout out and more to come on World Cup activities. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Seeing no more, anything from the city manager, we are adjourned.